much for joining me today on the Latifa Safir Studios YouTube channel. Today I just have a quick tutorial for you on how to cut out your curved template pieces using a rotary cutter. There's two different methods for doing this, and I'll walk you through both, and they're both very simple. The example that we're using for templates are the templates for the Molehills quilt pattern. There are 5 templates, as you can see, that comprise the fan unit that makes up the whole quilt. And that's the pattern there. It's the Molehills quilt pattern, and it's available at LatifaSafirStudios.com and on my Craftsy page as well. So we're going to start off with our fabric here. And I actually like to stack my fabric unless I'm doing some fussy cutting or something. I like to stack my fabric to do this. For this example, I just have 3 layers of fabric. But with a very sharp rotary cutter, I can cut 6 or 8 layers of fabric pretty easily. But today, for this example, we're just going to use 1. So the first method is to cut with freehand with the rotary cutter. So we're going to take a couple of straight pins here, and we're just going to put a couple of pins. We can pin very lightly for this method because we're not handling the fabric a ton. We just want to use the pins to hold that template in place and make sure the template or the fabric doesn't shift. So we're actually pinning through all layers of fabric. I want to make a note here that the templates are printed out actually on a regular standard copy paper. I find that this works sufficiently well. Sometimes if I know I'm going to cut out a ton of templates, like if I'm making a larger quilt, I will cut these out in a cardstock. But generally, I tend to stay away from cutting out on template plastic because it's more difficult to pin with template plastic. And because of the slipperiness of the template plastic, it's also sometimes hard to use pattern weights with it as well. And pattern weights are another way to be able to hold these templates in place. We're going to use our rotary cutter, and we're using the blade of the rotary cutter, and we're actually resting it up against the edge of the rotor, or the side of the rotary cutter. We're resting it up against the side of that template, and we're using that as the guide. One thing I should note here is that especially when you're cutting multiple layers of fabric, you want to make sure that your rotary cutter is perpendicular to your cutting surface and to the fabric that you're cutting. If you have a tendency to cut with your rotary cutter leaning to one direction or another, be a little bit more conscious about having it straight up and down. That's going to give you nice, clean, uniform shapes throughout your whole stack. And if you notice, my fingers are really close to the blade, but they're always to the left of the blade. You never, ever, in any circumstance, want to put your fingers in front of your blade. If you're left-handed, you're going to put your fingers to the right of the blade. So they look like they're close, but I actually, even if I slip, I'm not going to cut myself. So that's very important. And we're just going to follow the edge of that fabric. The edge of the template as we cut. You're going to take your time, and as you get better with it, you'll be able to speed it up a little bit. But you want nice, smooth, fluid movements here. If you skim off a little bitty edge of that template, it's not that big of a deal. I got a little bitty tiny edge there. You don't want to take off big chunks, and you also don't want to cut very far outside of that template. Curves are more forgiving than you would think that they are, so a little bit of variation isn't bad, but much more than a little bit, you want to go back and either make corrections or cut it again. Shift your template and cut it out again. We're going to continue cutting. Nice fluid movements. Your blade perpendicular to your cutting surface and to your fabric. We close our rotary cutter. I'm all about the rotary cutter safety. And it's cut out. And it actually cuts pretty quickly as well. So that's the first example. The second example, we're actually going to also pin, and we're going to use a combination of a ruler and the rotary cutter. You want a nice small ruler. This is a 2.5 by 6.5 inch ruler that works really well. And when you pin this time, you definitely need to pin, and you need to pin with a flat pin. These are the flower pins. They also come with little butterflies and some other motifs at the end. But you want to pin, make sure your templates are nice and flat, and that your fabric underneath is flat as well. So even when you start to pin the larger shapes, or the larger curves, so this is template number 2, 3, 4, and 5, of course, get increasingly larger. You still don't have to pin very heavily. Even on 5, I rarely use more than 4 or 5 pins. So in this case, you set your ruler on top. See how it sits really nicely on top of, even while it's pinned? Those flat pins really make for a nice surface for that. So now instead of using the edge of the template as a guide, we're actually going to set our blade right against the edge of that ruler, just like we're used to doing with our rotary cutting with rulers. What we're going to do is you're going to continuously rotate that ruler along that edge of your curve. This method takes a little bit of practice, but if your hands are a little bit more shaky or you're not very confident with your rotary cutter, I recommend it strongly. I do find that most people love the very first method to do freehand rotary cutting, and it works really, really well. So I encourage everyone, especially on this particular pattern, but even when you're cutting other curved templates as well, especially if they're larger, more gentle curves, I encourage you to try the freehand method. And so that's, you continue. So you move it, you rotate as you're cutting along, you shift it and move it a little bit more. So that's the second method. The very last method, I'm actually not going to demonstrate it, but I'll talk you through, is to use a nice sharp pair of scissors. You're also going to stack. You want a nice good pair of fabric scissors that's going to cut more than one layer to make this a lot easier. You are going to pin a little bit more heavily and closer to the perimeter of your template as well, and you're going to cut with your scissors. That one takes a little bit more time. We're so used to using our rotary cutters and our mats that if you get either the first or second method with the ruler or just freehand, if you get either one of those techniques down, then it makes for a really easy process for cutting out all of your templates for your Molehills quilt and for lots of other curved templates as well. I hope this has been helpful to you today, and please feel free to reach out to me and send pictures of projects or send questions, and I'll see what I can do to help out. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you soon. Thanks. Bye.